Hello, welcome to Bio 40C. I'm Professor Woods, and today I'm going to take you through some introductory anatomy and physiology, a little bit of an overview of the course, and we're going to then dive into anatomy and physiology of the digestive tract.
Obviously, you guys know that the digestive system is about breaking down foods in preparation for absorption. So we're breaking down foods from complex molecules into their monomeric, in chemistry terms, into their simplest forms, and then we're going to be absorbing those. And for the most part, we're talking about the macronutrients of carbohydrates, fats, and proteins, okay? But also vitamins and minerals. So digestion starts in the mouth, right? Where salivary glands secreting saliva to ease swallowing, but there are also a bunch of enzymes in there as well. Chewing breaks up the food mechanically, so mechanical digestion is where it starts, and then we've got enzymes like amylase. Amylase is an enzyme that breaks down starch. Can anybody remember what starch is in terms of its chemical composition? It's a carbohydrate, yep. Made up of, what are the monomers in starch? Sugars, yeah. Glucose specifically, yeah. It's a polymer of glucose. Okay, so we break down starch. Ritz crackers are full of starch, right? Anybody had these? I hope somebody has. Yeah. Most people have had one of these, right? So we've got this enzyme called amylase. Starch is this string of glucose molecules. Let's say these red dots are glucose molecules. Amylase is an enzyme that will break starch down, and it'll eclipse these glucose molecules actually into two glucoses joined together. And two glucoses joined together is a disaccharide called maltose. Maltose is sweet tasting. So if you do this experiment, and it is disgusting, I warn you. You take a Ritz cracker and you put it in your mouth and you chew it and then you don't swallow. Yeah, I know. I've had a class do this and I don't do it anymore. But you put it in your mouth and you chew it and you leave it there. That enzyme will break down the starch into maltose and that Ritz cracker will start tasting sweet. Diseases of the salivary glands. There's a syndrome called Sjögren's syndrome, which is autoimmune destruction of the salivary glands. And I believe Venus Williams, the tennis player, Serena and Venus, the sisters, Venus has Sjögren's syndrome. And it was probably one of the things that made it quite difficult for her to perform at a really high level, right? Because if it's difficult to eat foods, it's really hard to keep up with your nutrition when you're an elite athlete, like Venus Williams, like top level athletes. You have to eat a lot of calories to be a top level athlete. Okay, so you've chewed the food, you're swallowing it, it's called a bolus, into your esophagus. Your esophagus has muscles, it squeezes that bolus down and goes into your stomach. Your stomach is full of acid and it's a very muscular structure. So it's covered in mucus here and it's super muscular. And then you start to pound that food into a semi liquid mass called chyme. And at the entrance to your stomach, you've got the esophageal sphincter, and the exit, you've got the pyloric sphincter. You've got these little ridges, rugae, in your stomach, and then you've got some other structures that we'll get into. One of the diseases that's really common, and I suffer from this from time to time, is gastrointestinal reflux. Does anybody know somebody with that? GERD, yeah, gastrointestinal reflux disease. Yeah, so acid from the stomach starts refluxing up into the esophagus because the pyloric sphincter isn't closing. The esophageal sphincter isn't closing properly, and so that acid can cause damage because the esophagus doesn't have the same both bicarbonate and mucus lining that your stomach has to protect itself. Your stomach has a lot of mucus and bicarbonate in there to prevent it digesting itself. But when that acid fluxes up, that can cause damage. And that's called gastrointestinal reflux. And there are treatments for gastrointestinal reflux like Zantac and Prilosec, which in their own ways reduce acid reflux. So let's talk a little bit about the esophagus. It has this, here we go. This esophagus has a mucosa around the outside, submucosa. This is the layer of mucus. There's a squamous epithelium, lamina propria, and then a muscular system, smooth muscle. Now, once you hit the stomach has these ridges, right? It has the esophagus comes in here. The esophageal sphincter is here. It's got musculature around it to squeeze it, to close it, and then a lot of musculature around the stomach. So when you're digesting, we don't really feel this, right? But your stomach is constantly crushing the food in there, moving it around, crushing it. We've got longitudinal muscles and circular muscles, and some oblique muscles as well. So it's basically squishing and crushing this food in every which way. Now, when you start to look at the surface of the stomach, there's a layer of mucosa, there's a layer of mucus on the outside. I knew a professor that studied mucus, right? Snot, basically. He studied mucus the entire time. There was this entire... and there are different kinds of mucus molecules in mucus. It's basically a carbohydrate structure. And within the stomach, though, there are these pits. The mucosa, I'm going to tell you, the mucosal layer is there to prevent that acid that's being secreted from these pits from digesting the stomach lining, and also to protect you from peptidases, right? What is a peptidase? Yeah, so peptidases are proteases. They're breaking down proteins. Cells have proteins on their surface. You don't want peptidases digesting your stomachs, the cells on your stomach lining, right? So this mucosa, the mucus, is helping to protect us from acid and from peptidases. Cells are secreting this thick mucus layer, and these are these gastric pits that line your stomach. They have cells in there, like chief cells, that secrete enzymes, digestive enzymes, like peptidases, like pepsinogen. Okay? These are the ones that are going to help you start to digest protein. So when you have a meal, it's a good idea to have some protein in there, because these peptidases then have something to work on, right? It's good. Like the amylases to work on carbohydrates, the peptidases to work on protein. It's a good idea to have a mixture of carbohydrates, fats, and proteins at every meal, I think. G cells produce a variety of different hormones. G cells actually produce gastrin. Gastrin is involved in regulation of stomach acidity. So that's important. And then parietal cells are there to secrete the hydrogen ions which make your stomach acidic. So what are they doing, these parietal cells? They're taking bicarbonate here. They're putting bicarbonate into the bloodstream, and they're putting hydrogen ions into the lumen of the gastric gland, which goes up into the stomach. This co-transport with chloride. Chloride is not something we have to worry about too much. Yeah, hydrogen ions are generated inside the parietal cells. The enzyme that does this is carbonic anhydrase, which converts carbon dioxide and water into this acid. That acid then dissociates, and the hydrogen ions start to make your stomach acidic. We've got these hormonal controls, which these parietal cells and the G cells and chief cells are all involved in. But we also have control from the central nervous system. We've got a nerve called the vagus nerve, which comes down and contacts the stomach, talks to cells producing mucus, talks to chief cells, talks to parietal cells, talks to G cells. This is all part of your nervous system, and a lot of this is going on without our conscious intervention, right? This is all happening in the brain underneath our cognitive cerebral cortex, right? So this constant digestive system is going on, and we're not really aware of it, but we do have a pretty extensive network of hormones controlling how the stomach works, controlling appetite, controlling digestion, and also a nervous system, right? So that's why the sympathetic nervous system is our fear, fright, flight nervous system, and the parasympathetic system is our rest and digest. So the parasympathetic nervous system is talking via the vagal nerve down to the cells to tell us to rest, put your feet up, and digest that delicious dinner that you just ate. So a lot of control systems going on here. This is one of the reasons why it's super complicated. Weight management for people who suffer from obesity can be super complicated, right? Because it's not just hormones, it's not just basal metabolic rates, it's also your nervous system, your sympathetic, your parasympathetic nervous system. The whole works. Quite complicated regulation. Interesting. Okay, Barrett's esophagus is, so gastrointestinal reflux, good. When it gets really out of control and there's a lot of damage occurring at the esophageal sphincter, you get this damage, and this is damage looking down at the sphincter, looking down here, and the acid fluxing here. That causes Barrett's esophagus. That damage there can become cancerous. Zantac is like one of the things you can buy over the counter. It reduces hydrochloric acid in the stomach by inhibiting the release of histamine. Yeah, that's right. Zantac blocks histamine action. So we've got some histamine receptors in our stomach, histamine H2 receptors that fine-tune the amount of acid in our stomach. And so Zantac is a heartburn medication that blocks histamine action, and in doing so, helps regulate stomach acidity. Other things that can go wrong with the stomach. Peptic ulcers. Peptic ulcers often will show up with blood in the stool, sometimes weight loss, and they're often associated with a bacterial infection. And the bacteria that attaches to the stomach wall, it's got these strange hooks, it's amazing. It's called Helicobacter pylori. Helicobacter pylori can attach to the stomach lining, cause inflammation, and ultimately acid can start burning a hole in your stomach lining. And that's a peptic ulcer, a very dangerous condition. Nowadays, we don't see very many people with peptic ulcers. The reason being, you can treat this with antibiotics. There are antibiotics that will specifically kill Helicobacter pylori. So, very treatable. You know of somebody who has a peptic ulcer, most of the time it'll be due to Helicobacter pylori. Most of the time it's treatable. So we don't have as many ulcers as we used to have. Okay, the intestines. We've got the food is coming from our stomach into our small intestines. Here are our small intestines. What are they, about 12 meters worth of small intestines. The small intestines empty into the large intestine. You've got the appendix here, which is kind of a vestigial organ. People think that it's a place where we keep some of our microbiome, like basically a store of microbes. That if, for example, you were treated with antibiotics and all the microbes in your colon, your microbiome lives here in your large intestine, in your colon. The ascending, transverse, and descending colon, and then that goes into the anus, into the rectum, and then through the anus to get rid of the food. But this is where your microbiome lives, and your microbiome is your friend. Your microbiome you want to keep happy. This is also where most of colorectal cancer occurs, mostly here on your colon.
So when you look at your intestines, they have a lot of surface area because this is where most of our food absorption is occurring. And so they have surface area in a number of ways. So these little things are cells here. You've got goblet cells here producing mucus. Goblet cells are producing mucus. Again, you need mucus to help the food slide through your intestines. There's a musculature around there squeezing the food through your intestines as well. But you can see these villi, okay? And each of these is an intestinal cell. You can see lots and lots of little intestinal cells. And there's a very, very significant blood supply to the villi in our intestines. So the intestines are covered with these incredible invaginations. And these are the cells. And then here we've got this blood supply. We've got the vein and the artery going away. That blood supply is going to go past the liver, taking all of the foods and any toxins. So this is something that I think a lot of people forget, right? They're like, oh, I can't eat something which might be toxic. Well, thankfully, 400,000 years of evolution, your ancestors ate things that were not great for them, right? So you have a lot of capacity to remove toxins, right? So just because something might have some kind of toxin on it, it's not going to kill you, okay? Now, too much, obviously, that's not good. But your system is really well adapted to protecting you from chemical insults. And so a lot of the things, a lot of chemicals get absorbed, but, I hear people all the time like freaking out, oh, it might have some pesticides on it. Yeah, it might, but you got a liver, it's going to be really good at getting rid of some of that stuff. So I think there's a lot of over-concern. We live in a society that, in my opinion, is actually too clean most of the time. Really clean. We just don't challenge our system enough, especially our immune system. This is also a massive immune organ. So we've got the blood supply collecting all of the monomers from carbohydrates, fats, proteins as they enter, amino acids coming in, simple sugars coming in, like glucose and fructose, and fatty acids coming in. Some of the larger fatty acids will enter these lacteals, and these are lymphatic systems. So large fats coming in differently from the amino acids and the sugars. So the large fats are coming into your lymphatic system. That lymphatic system, you probably have heard of lymph nodes, right? Has anybody ever gone to their doctor and had their lymph nodes checked? Yeah, right? So most of the time you'll see them like pressing in here, the swollen lymph nodes, sometimes under your armpit, you've got lymph nodes. What are your lymph nodes? What's in those lymph nodes? Why are they checked in to see if they're swollen when you've got an infection? Yeah, that's it. Anybody else? Yeah. Yeah, T cells and B cells. A lot of germinal centers, actually, a lot of B cells, but T cells providing antigens to B cells as well. So we've got a lot of immune surveillance. So what I hope you can see here is that this is where a lot of our white blood cells are hanging out. So one of the things I want you to understand is that your digestive tract is actually a major immune organ, major immune system organ. Okay. So we've got a lot of white blood cells there. Why do you think our digestive tract is a major immune system organ? Why? Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. A lot of microorganisms are coming in on our food, right? Coming in for the ride, and our body's protecting us against that stuff. Now, most of the time, our food's a bit too clean, right? So our immune system's got nothing to do. So we actually have quite a high incidence of asthma, allergy, immune system dysfunction. I think in large part because we're not eating dirty enough. But yeah, this is a major immune organ. A large part of your immune system. So a big part of your immune system in your skin, big part of your immune system in your GI tract, especially your intestines, small intestines. Okay. So that your white blood cells, they're constantly monitoring for infection and constantly trying to protect you. And then your fats get absorbed into the lymphatic system. Yeah, here we go. Fatty acids coming into the lymphatic system. Got the amino acids and the monosaccharides going into the blood. So this is how we're absorbing all of our nutrients here. Yeah, there you go. 10, 12 feet long. That's about right for most people. Then what's left is going to go into our large intestine. Going to go up ascending, transverse, descending colon. The major function is to absorb a lot of the water, and there's a lot of indigestible material there. What material in your diet might be indigestible? Yeah, good fiber. Fiber. A lot of fiber is indigestible. So why is it the USDA recommends we eat 27 grams of fiber a day? It's insoluble fiber. There's soluble and insoluble fibers. Why do we have to eat fiber? Well, it does, yeah. So it does help things, smooth things through. There's another reason. Yeah, yeah. There's one other really important reason. Nobody got it? Well, you can't digest fiber. Does anybody know what fiber is made up of? Complex carbohydrates, exactly, thank you. Complex carbohydrates. So you can't digest complex carbohydrates, but microbes in your colon can digest them. So when you're eating fiber, you're feeding your microbiome. So you're feeding your microbiome, and by feeding your microbiome, what sort of microbes? You've got thousands of species in your microbiome. What's the advantage of, why do you think we do that? Why do we think we need to feed our microbiome? Any thoughts? Yeah.
The microbiomes, they take in the fibers and then they expel like nutrients that are broken down from that?
Yeah, so actually we get things like B group vitamins, we get some short chain fatty acids which are anti-inflammatory, and we're also growing these healthy bacteria that protect us from invading organisms. So it's quite protective as well. So it's super healthy to feed your microbiome. So the best way to feed your microbiome is to eat a variety of fruits, variety of vegetables, variety of whole grains. It's going to feed your microbiome. Most Americans only get about half the amount of fiber that they need. Okay, so what can go wrong in your colon? Colorectal cancer. Colorectal cancer, to reduce your risk of colorectal cancer, processed meats, decrease processed meats. Processed meats, things like hams and dried meats, are definitely a risk factor for colorectal cancer. Alcohol is a risk factor for colorectal cancer. There are some inflammatory conditions like Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis where that immune system that we were talking about gets out of control. And in large part also because your microbiome gets unbalanced. So you've got invading organisms causing inflammation as well. So people who suffer from Crohn's and ulcerative colitis, these inflammatory conditions where they've got inflammation at different parts of their colon, have to be very careful with the foods that they eat because some foods can trigger this inflammatory response with overgrowth, if you will, of organisms that are unhealthy for their GI tract. So you've got to learn to avoid trigger foods if you suffer from Crohn's or ulcerative colitis. This is something a lot of people suffer from, lactose intolerance. Lactase is an enzyme that is produced in your small intestines, and lactose is milk sugar, right? It's the sugar found in milk. So we all start with lactase as babies. When we're having milk, breast milk, we can digest that. All babies can digest it, almost. They're very rare mutations. But as we get older, some people lose the capacity. They lose this enzyme, and they end up with very low levels of the enzyme lactase, and so they cannot break down lactose. And lactose is a dimeric sugar made up of glucose and galactose. And if you can't break the bonds between the glucose and the galactose, then the lactose in your gastrointestinal tract is fermented by bacteria, and this causes all kinds of unwelcome side effects if you suffer from lactose intolerance. So if you drink milk, we have milk products, any product that's high in lactose, you lack the enzyme lactase, can cause this gastrointestinal discomfort. And again, I would urge you to pay attention to your body. Doesn't mean completely avoiding lactose in your diet, but only having as much lactose as you can tolerate. It's actually a bit of a problem with the USDA's guidelines because they don't really take into account the large number of people who suffer from lactose intolerance. Guidelines are very poor on that. If you do suffer from lactose intolerance, because a lot of milk products are where we get a lot of calcium and vitamin D, you probably need to emphasize other foods that have calcium and vitamin D in your diet. Another disease that we can see in the intestines is celiac disease. And celiac disease is when you have an allergy to gluten. And this is not a sensitivity to gluten, but an actual allergy to gluten. There's also sensitivity to gluten, which gluten is a fiber found in wheat. But if you have an allergy to gluten, if you eat foods that contain gluten, they can destroy the villi and can destroy your ability to absorb nutrients. So celiac disease is quite a serious disease if you suffer from that particular allergy to gluten. Now, there's a lot of people who choose to eat gluten-free products that have a sensitivity to gluten. They don't suffer from celiac disease. And some people are sensitive to gluten, and it makes them feel unwell. But that's a kind of different thing from celiac disease. Okay, so we've got this mechanical digestion, we've got chemical digestion, we're breaking everything down and we're absorbing it. Where are we here on time? Okay. I think I'm going to...
Say your friend Lysania is eating an apple. I'd like you to think about the chemicals in that apple. You can talk to others, you can look things up online, whatever you want to do, and write down what you think is going to happen chemically to that apple in terms of digestion, and then maybe have a little think about where those chemicals might end up in terms of the physiology. Okay? So I'm going to let you guys go ahead and do that. Yeah, think about what kinds of chemicals an apple might have in it, and start jotting down your ideas on your note card.